Hey everybody, in this video I want to show you the tools within KRITA that are the most likely to be useful when using KRITA as an interface for AI image generation. Previously I've gone over how to install and use the Generative AI plugin for KRITA. Now I want to walk you through the process of actually creating something with an emphasis on the tools within KRITA, and this isn't really different from using KRITA for digital painting, but maybe just a slightly different emphasis. Alright, so when you first open KRITA, this is the screen you'll get. You'll want to start a new image. And here you can set your image size, and this is going to be the size of the image that we're going to be generating. So we want to keep this pretty small to start out with, because the larger the image you're going to be generating, the longer it's going to take. So we're going to keep our image size in pixels, and I'm going to go with 1024 by 1024. If you want to go faster, you could try 768 by 768. We really don't need to worry about the resolution or the color space here. That would really only be relevant if we were going to be printing this later on. So we can just leave that at the default and click create. So we've been given a new blank white canvas, and this is the default layout for KRITA. But what I usually do is go to Window, Workspace, and here there are a lot of presets for different workspaces, and I usually choose the Big Paint 2 workspace. And just to customize that a little bit, I take the advanced color selector here by clicking the name of it next to this lock icon, not the actual tab up here. Click that and drag it, move it out here where it's easily accessible, and then I just close this palette and the specific color selector because I don't use those. And all these panels can be resized, make things a little bit easier to see. We can have more space to see our canvas here. So over here on the left, we have all of our different tools, and we're going to be going more into these as we go. Below that, we have the brushes, and these are all of the brushes that come with KRITA. And the brushes come pre-separated into different groups. So if I select all here, I can see all of the brushes that are available. One thing to keep in mind is that some things that seem like they should be separate tools, like the clone tool here, which is like the clone stamp tool in Photoshop, that's actually a separate brush here rather than a separate tool. And I don't know why they do it that way, but there's going to be a lot you can do here with the different brushes. And if you right click on any brush, you'll have the option to assign a tag to it. And here you can create a new tag if you want to. I have all of my favorite brushes in a tag called Best, so if I go here and select that, these are all the brushes that I use most often, and probably 95% of the time I use this Charcoal Rock Soft, and then the airbrush for blending, as well as the eraser brushes. I'm trying to incorporate some more brushes into my paintings, just to add some variety, but those are the ones I use most of the time. Over on the right, we have an overview. And this just gives us an overview of our entire canvas. So if I go ahead and paste an image here from our clipboard, so it gives an idea of what we're looking at, you can see this is giving me an overview of our entire canvas here. And even if I zoom in, I can still see the whole thing up here. It helps me keep an eye on the composition. And maybe if I'm going to be posting this online, I can get an idea of what it will look like as a thumbnail, and that's just a useful thing to keep open somewhere in your workspace. Below that, we have the layers, and I'm assuming just about everybody is familiar with the way layers work, but this allows you to keep different parts of your image separate. So you can see the image I just pasted in has been pasted as a new layer. So if I hide this layer by clicking the eyeball icon next to it, you can see I still have my blank white canvas unchanged underneath it. And if I were to create a new layer above it by clicking the plus icon here, it will create a new blank layer. And with my brush tool, I can paint over that. And then if I hide this layer or delete it, I still have my unaltered image below that. So that's a good way to keep track of different parts of your image and make changes without having to commit to them completely too soon. I can move my layers up and down within the layer stack by clicking the up and down arrows here, or just by clicking and dragging them up and down. And I can delete a layer by hitting the trash can icon here. Below that, we have the tool options. So if I click a tool over here on the left, down here it will give me more options for that tool. As far as navigating on the canvas, if I put my cursor over the canvas and I middle click, I can drag my canvas around, move it around. If I hold down Control and middle click, I can zoom in and out. If I hold down Control by itself, it comes up with my color selector tool, and this will allow me to click and select whatever color my cursor is over. So you can see as I go around and click on different parts of my image, it's updating over here on my color selector with the color that I'm sampling from my image. If I hold down Shift and middle click, it will allow me to rotate my canvas, and if I hit the number 5 on my keyboard, it puts my canvas upright again. And as you can see, with my brush tool selected, it's giving me a preview of the outline of my brush. And if I hold down Shift and left click and drag, it will allow me to change my brush size quickly like that. Also, if I right click, it gives this tool where I can do all of the things I just showed you. So if I click this dot around the outside of the larger circle and drag it, I can rotate my canvas. I can select my brushes here and colors. I can zoom here and return it to 100%, and I can fit my canvas to the view. I can make this full screen if I wanted to. And I also have the option to mirror my canvas, which is good for spotting mistakes once your eyes have become too used to the image that you've been looking at. And out to the side here, I can also change my brush size and brush opacity. All of these keyboard shortcuts are customizable by going to Settings and Configure KRITA under Keyboard Shortcuts. They can all be changed here. You can also select shortcut layouts that are similar to Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint or Paint Tool Side if you're already more familiar with those. I personally find the default very intuitive to use though. Also, if you're going to be using a tablet of some sort, there are some tablet settings here, but I don't really configure anything here. I use the Wacom tablet properties, so I just have my tablet set up here like this with the pen, the eraser, and then the mapping. And I just keep my tablet out to the side of my keyboard. This is the same tablet I've had for about the last 14 years, and it still does the job okay. I also keep my mouse out to the side because sometimes that is easier to have a mouse where you can click, especially for making selections. That can get sort of cumbersome trying to use a pen for that. So having some sort of tablet where you can have control of the pressure of your brush is definitely beneficial to what we are going to be doing, but it's not absolutely necessary. I think you could do just about everything we're going to be looking at using just a mouse. Okay, so let's go ahead and make an image. So I'm going to delete both of these layers, and I'm going to open the Docker for the AI image generation, going to Settings, Dockers, and AI image generation. Last time I did a lot of things with the control nets, but this time I'm going to keep it pretty basic. For my prompt, I'm just going to go ahead and paste in a prompt that I created a while back. And so I'm just starting with my mode in Generate. What I'm going to do is click here and set my batch size up to 10, get rid of whatever that problem Photoshop is having, and I'm going to click Generate and look for an image that seems interesting. Alright, so I've had it make a bunch of images for me, and I've picked this one out as having the most potential. People criticize AI image generators for being sort of like a slot machine, and it doesn't have to be that way, but that is exactly the way I've used it here, just giving it a lot of information and then having it create a bunch of different things and choosing what I like best. It can be a fun and interesting way to generate ideas and concepts. One reason I chose this one is because it got the perspective mostly right. One thing it does a lot is it will get the perspective incorrect, especially if there's more than one person in the scene. And you can see that's happening here. We have someone in the background here. They would probably be about 3 feet tall if we're assuming they're in the correct perspective. So what I'm looking for here is any big changes like that I want to make before I commit to this image and upscale it or do any refinements. So there's a few things I want to change here. So let me just go ahead and create a new layer, and that's created a new blank layer for me, which is a new transparent layer. So the first thing I want to do is delete this guy back here because he really doesn't fit in. So how I might do that is I might use the AI Inpainting to clean this up, but before I do that, I'm going to make it easier by painting him out first. So I'm going to take my charcoal rock soft brush. I'm going to Control and click and select the color closest to him, and I'm just going to start painting in here, and I'm going to try to make this match as best I can. I think when we upscale the image, this would probably be good enough, and we'd probably get some more detail there, and it wouldn't stand out that this had been painted in. But let's go ahead and make a selection here by clicking our polygonal selection tool, and I'm going to just click, and that will allow me to start dragging out a line from the point where I just clicked. If I click again, I can start dragging out another segment of that line and just continue that around the area that I want to refine here. And now you can see my option here has been changed from generate to fill because I've created a selection. If I take my strength down, I want to take it down pretty low, maybe about somewhere around 25%. I don't want this changed much. I just want it to blend in with the rest of the image a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and click refine and see how well that works. Okay, so it's given me 3 different options here, and if I click on those, you can see it's created a preview layer up here for me, and I can click on different ones and see how well they work. And I might try taking my strength up a bit, maybe 35%, and let's see how well that works. You can see this is running much faster because I am just taking a small selection here, so maybe just a little bit higher. Okay, I think that one works pretty well. So if I click my apply here with the checkbox, it has applied that layer for me over here. So if I hide my preview layer, I still have my new generation here. I think I accidentally clicked it twice, so I can delete one of those. And just comparing that there, you can see it's taken our painted area and added some details and made it blend in with the rest of the image better. But one thing is, it is also, because my selection was imprecise, it's taken this part of her jacket here and changed that, which this doesn't look as right. It looks like it sort of started to be smeared up into her body in a way that it wasn't originally. So I can deselect my area, my selected area here, by hitting Control, Shift, and the letter A. That will deselect everything. I could also go to Select and Deselect. And what I want to do is paint out this area or erase out this area that I don't like of her jacket. And I could just do that with the eraser tool, erase part of that layer, but I'm going to go ahead and show a useful feature that we're probably going to be using several times throughout this. So what I can do to this is add a transparency mask, and that will allow me to erase out certain parts but not lose them permanently. So I can bring them back, paint them back in if I want to. So let me show you that. If I right click on my layer here that I just created and go to add and transparency mask, it's added to this layer a new mask layer. And if I set my color to black with this layer mask selected, I can use a brush. So I'm going to use my airbrush and use my brush tool and hold down Shift and drag to change my brush size down to where I want it. And now if I paint with black, it's going to erase out, let me just zoom in here, it's going to erase out my layer that I just created. So anywhere that I paint black within the transparency mask is going to become transparent, and the transparency mask is only being applied to this layer. So if I click here, you can see this is what's happening. So I just right clicked and clicked isolate active layer just to show this. This is what's happening with my layer. So you can see the parts with the transparency mask that I've painted black are now transparent, and that allows me to make sure I'm painting on the right layer. That allows me to bring back these parts that I don't want changed. So compare that with and without the transparency mask. And just looking at the rest of the image, there are a few minor problems I might want to change. Alright, I think that's okay for the most part. If I want to compare my changes with or without, I can just hide my layer with the eyeball icon and just kind of look back at the changes that I made. Okay, so next I want to upscale and refine my image. And I could do that by switching my mode here to upscale and using an upscale model and the refine upscale image here. But I really there's something about the way the upscale models, the effect they tend to have on the image that I don't like. You tend to lose a lot of this detail and sort of the grain of the image. Maybe if you can find a good upscale model, that wouldn't happen, but it seems to always happen to me. So instead of actually using the upscale mode here, what I'm going to do is leave this at generate. I'm going to go up here to image, scale image to new size, and I'm going to, I'll just go ahead and double the size of my image. So instead of 1024, I'm going to make this 248, and before I do that, I'm going to lock the proportions of my image here by clicking the chain link icon out to the side. So let's make this 2048 and click OK. So let's just increase the size of our image. And now to refine this, I'm going to come over here and set my strength and maybe leave it at 35%. Maybe I could go a little bit higher. Let's try 40%, right around there. Click refine, and this will take a moment because it's a larger image. All right, so here's the refined image that's given us, and it has increased the contrast a bit. I'm not real happy with her face and the way that's changed. So what I might do with that is maybe try and do that separately. So I'm going to go ahead and apply our new image here. I'm going to right click on that and add a transparency mask. And I'm going to use my airbrush and paint out that new face that's given us. And now we have our old face back, but it's the unupscaled face. So what I want to do is I want to be able to select out just her face and upscale that separately. So to do that, I want to be able to select both our refined upscale layer and the unrefined layer that's showing through underneath now. So if I turn this off, you can see we still have our original underneath, which is the layer with the face that we want. We also have our refined parts laid over top. So I want to be able to select both of those together. So what I'm going to do is go up to Layer, New, and New Layer from Visible. And now that's taken everything that's visible in our image and created a new layer from it. So it's flattened all of these other layers that we have here together and created just a new flat layer with everything we had visible in that one layer. So we're losing everything that we had separated out here before, but I think we've made all the edits that we wanted to make, and we're going to go ahead and commit to this. So I'm going to select her face here. I'm going to take the freehand selection tool and just draw out a selection around her face, keeping it out a bit just to give the AI more of a context of what we're looking at. I'm going to hold down Control and hit C, and then Control and V, and that's pasted our selection here into a new layer that's just her face. And now I'm going to hit Control, Shift, and A to undo our selection, and I'm going to go over here to our Transform tool, and when I click that, it's given me this bounding box around the layer that we have selected. And if I click and drag on any of these boxes at the corners, I can scale and distort my image, but I don't want to change, I don't want to squash or stretch this. So if I hold down Shift and grab any of these squares here around this bounding box, it will lock my aspect ratio, and I can scale this uniformly. And I just want to scale this up to where it takes up most of our canvas, because I want this to be large here because I want the AI to add more detail to it. So I'm essentially just making this a higher resolution, and I can hit enter, and that will apply those changes I just made. And now, because I just want the AI to sample this part with her face, I'm going to right click on this layer that we just were editing and go down here to select opaque. And that will select all of the opaque parts of this layer, which is just our face selection here. And now I can set my strength down to maybe 35% again and click refine. So I'm not really liking what it's giving me here. Actually, what I might do is, let's try this. I'm going to click refine again. And there's refine the face a bit. And what I might do is go ahead and apply that. So let's create a new layer here from the refine that we just did. And now with that new refine layer selected, I'm going to click refine again. And there's our second refining pass. So it's just taken our first time we refined it and ran through again and refined it again. And I think that's a little bit better. I'm going to go ahead and call that good enough. There are still a few little things that need to be fixed, but I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm going to go ahead and click apply on our second refined layer. And I'm going to do Control-Shift-A to deselect everything. I'm going to hide the layer I just created from our new refined layer. I'm going to delete the first refined step that we did, and I'm also going to delete this first upscaled face that we made. Delete that layer, and now go back to my refined face layer, unhide it, select it. I'm going to set the layer opacity down to around 50%, and this just controls how transparent the layer is. So what I'm going to be doing is resizing this layer to fit back over where her face needs to be, and I need to be able to see how big it needs to be and where I need to put it. So I'm going to make this layer with her face 50% opacity. With our transform tool selected, I'm going to click and select this layer, and now grab our little boxes out to the side and scale this down to about where it needs to be and move it and try and line it up without rotating the canvas. So I'm just going to scale and move until it doesn't look blurry anymore. Because when it's not blurry, that means it's lined up. And it's not going to be perfect because we have changed the image a bit. We're just trying to get it pretty close. So I'm mainly looking around her eyes, her eyebrows, and her chin, and around the silhouette of her face. Her hair has changed quite a bit, especially on the outsides of our image here. So that's not going to line up exactly, but I think that's going to work good enough. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter to apply that transformation and set my opacity back up to 100%. And now I want to erase out all of this excess around the edges and just have this blend in. So I'm going to right click on that layer, add transparency mask, my color set to black, use my airbrush, and I can paint out those edges and try to have that blend in as much as possible. Also, for a transparency mask, if I paint with white, that does bring back in any parts of the image, and gray will just make it semi-transparent, so you can have a lot of control like that. But I just want to take out the edges. Okay, so that's going to be our upscaled face, and we can compare. So it has cleaned up things a bit. I am going to need to go in and clean up a few things on her lips and her eyes particularly, but I'm going to leave it like that for the time being. Okay, so another tool that I want to show is the clone tool, which like I mentioned before is actually a brush. So I'm going to create a new layer and select our clone tool and zoom in here, and I want to delete wherever this pink square is here. So the way this works is, for this brush is showing two different brushes on our canvas. The one with the X represents the one that I'm actually painting with, and the one that is just a blank circle represents the part of the image that is actually sampling and cloning into the space where I'm painting. So if I hold down Control and select a place on my image and then paint, you can see it's taking the part of the image that's under the empty circle and cloning it to the space with the circle with the X. So this allows you to easily paint out different things in your image while still maintaining the texture of your image that might be hard to duplicate if you're just painting this out with a normal brush. One important setting, if you go up here to the brush settings, which is this icon here, if you go to painting mode, you can check clone from all visible layers. So with that selected, it will clone from your entire image. Otherwise, it would just be trying to sample the layer that's currently selected, which right now is completely empty, so I wouldn't be getting anything. But with that selected, it's sampling everything in my image. So I can maybe sample this here, and I might have to sample in a few different places. The last tool that I'm going to show, which is an important one, is actually additional options within the transform tool. What I'm going to do is go ahead and go up here to layer, new layer from visible, and I'll just flatten out everything in my image again and give us a new layer. I do prefer using that. I could go up here to layer, flatten image, and that would flatten all my layers together. So it would delete essentially all of the layers that I have and just give me one flattened image. I prefer the new layer from visible because there have been times where I've wanted to go back and find and edit previous layers, realize I need to change something. So I do use the new layer from visible more than I use the flattened image. But now that I've done that, I can select my transform tool, and over here in our tool options, we have this liquify option, and that will allow us to easily move and scale and push around parts of our image and edit things that way. So just to demonstrate that, so what I'm going to do is select out my character here just with the freehand selection tool, and I'm doing this because the Liquify feature takes a lot of computing power, so you don't want it to be trying to sample and change your entire image at once. It's better to separate out the area that you're trying to change. With this selected, I'm going to hit Control C and then Control V for paste, and that's pasted my character into a new layer by herself. I'm going to hit Control Shift A to deselect everything. I'm going to select our transform tool and select the liquify, and I have multiple options here. I have the move option, so I can click and I can drag and it will move parts of our image. I have the expand and contract. I'm not sure exactly what it's called. Scale, okay. If I do that, I can shrink or grow. So if reverse is checked down here, it will shrink, just normal. It will grow our image. This will twist our image. You can also take the erase here, and that will undo the changes that you just made. Also, if you want to undo all of these changes and start over, you can hit escape, and that will return your image back to the unmodified state. So I might just use my move here. And now I can hit enter, and that will apply all of those changes. And if I want to compare my changes, I can hit Control Z, and that shows the before. And if I hit Control Shift and Z, that will redo those changes and see the after. And I think that's an improvement overall. I did drag out her shoulder there a little bit, maybe too much. And what I can do is right click this, add transparency mask, and go in with my airbrush with the black. And because we've edited this layer and moved parts of our background too, I'm just looking for any places that don't line up anymore. I'm going to try and make those blend in a little better. Actually, the last time I'm going to use AI on this, I thought I might just do a trick that I've done sometimes where I'm going to go to switch this to a photorealistic style. I'm going to be using the Epic Realism checkpoint for this. I'm going to have it sample my entire image. I'm going to leave the strength at 3.5 and click refine. So you can see what it's tried to do is take our image and render it in a more photorealistic style, and that's worked better on some parts than others. Obviously the face is not going to work as well. So what I might do is actually go ahead and apply this image and then click refine again to just refine this already somewhat photorealistic enhancement. Refine that again. Okay, so obviously we've gotten some somewhat weird looking results in a few places. The photorealistic style doesn't really know how to interpret a stylized face, but we are getting some nice details around her jacket and her outfit. And in the background, you could try using a control net or something to try and get a cleaner generation here, but I think this is going to work for the most part. So let's go ahead and apply that. I'm going to delete this one, our first pass at the photorealistic style. And for this one, I'm going to right click, add transparency mask, and then I'm going to use the paint bucket tool, which will fill an entire area with whatever color you have selected. So I'm going to use this, and when I click, it's going to fill my entire transparency mask with black, and that has made our entire layer, everything in it, transparent. So we can't see anything in that layer at all. But if I take my brush tool with the airbrush and set this to white, anywhere I paint, I can start to paint back in that photo realistic style from our photo layer. So I can go back and just sort of paint in some details to her outfit here, maybe a little bit on her skin, and any areas that start to not look quite right, I can go back in with black and paint those out. Change that back. If I hit D on my keyboard, the letter D, it will set my colors to the default, which is black and white, and then I can alternate between those by hitting the X key. So every time I hit X, it will alternate between black and white, and I can use that to quickly paint things in and out with my transparency mask. All right, now I can toggle that on and off. I can turn the transparency mask on and off, and I can turn off the layer with the photorealism style and compare before and after. So I think the after, it's given us some nice, more vibrant colors and some more details and some more realistic shading. So I like that overall. So the last step would be to go in and just clean up any small areas, and I would just, with my normal painting method, just with a brush, go in and try and clean up some of these areas. But before I do that, I want to show what I normally do just to finish an image as far as correcting color and contrast and things like that. If you click the down arrow next to the new layer button, you have the option for add filter layer. And what this will do is it will allow you to apply an image filter as a layer. This will allow you to adjust your image in different ways without actually committing to those adjustments entirely. So the first thing I'm going to do is apply a color adjustment, which is under adjust and then color adjustment. And here I have this line, and if I click on it, I can create a point on this line, and if I move it, you can see it changes the brightness and contrast of my image. If I create another point, then I have 2 points of control, and I usually create 3 points where I can change, where I can create sort of this sloped curve and enhance the contrast. It gives me sort of this gentle sweep going through there. If I click OK, I now have a filter layer here, which I can hide, see the before and after. I can also dial that back a little bit with the layer opacity if I want. So usually what I'll do is create a filter layer and have it set a little more extreme than where I want it, and then maybe dial it back just a little bit with the opacity. So maybe right there is pretty good. And if I want to edit my filter layer here, edit the properties of it, I can click this icon here, and that will open up this filter layer properties for me again, and I can make changes there. So I'm going to repeat that, go to add filter layer, and I'm going to go down to enhance and unsharp mask, and this will allow me to sharpen my image, and I'm going to set this to around somewhere close to 2, and maybe set this one a little over 1, and That's a little bit too much, but I'm going to go ahead and leave that and then just turn down the opacity on that a bit. I like to make that pretty subtle because it's easy to overdo and you sort of start to get a halo effect around the dark and light parts of your image. Maybe finally what I'll do is add another filter layer and go to Adjust and Color Balance. And here I can make the shadows maybe more of a blue color, and maybe the midtones and the highlights I can make a little warmer to add a little contrast to our image that way. I also like to add some bloom to my images, and that is just where you can see a bit here, the light parts, they sort of bleed around the edges of what's in front of them. So you sort of get that light wrapping around objects. So I'm going to try and enhance that. To do that, I'm going to create a new layer here. You have here different layer styles. So these will affect the way that your layer, the colors in your layer, the color and the brightness of your layer interacts with the layers below it. So multiply will darken, screen will lighten, but I'm going to select the luminosity shine, and I'm going to sample this blue color up here, and when I paint, add some bloom around this light, and I'm going to sample this color of the sky and add some bloom around there. And finally, I like to add a vignette around my image, so I'm going to choose black. There's actually no vignette tool in KRITA as far as I know, but I usually just do that by using a large black airbrush and just going around the edges. And I may erase this out over our light source there, and then take the opacity down pretty far, and that sort of will enhance the composition, just sort of draw the eye more towards the middle of the image by de-emphasizing the edges of the image. So now I want to be able to continue to paint and work on my image, but I want to be able to keep all of my filter layers separate so I can continue to go back and edit and change those if I want to. And what's going to happen if I create a new layer beneath our filter masks and I start to paint in my normal way by sampling a color and then painting out to the side, what's going to start happening is it's sampling the color that's been modified by our filter masks, and then it's applying that to the canvas, and then the filter masks are modifying that color again. So the more I paint, the more my colors are going to gradually become more and more distorted. So what that means essentially is I don't want to be painting with all of these filter masks on. So to avoid that, I can select all of those layers that I just created. I can do that by clicking the first layer and then scrolling up to the top and holding down Shift and selecting the last layer there, and now it's selected all of those layers. And if I click the plus icon for a new layer, it will create a new layer group with all of those layers in it. And as you can see, when I did that, I've lost all of my filter layer modifications, and to get those back I need to click this icon that sort of looks like a brick wall, and what that will do is it will allow the individual layers in my group to modify my image. So if I click that, it allows all of my filter layers to show through again, and now I can collapse this group with this down arrow here, and I can hide it. So every time I want to go back and paint here and make a modification, I can just hide my group with all of my filter layers in it. So I'm going to do that and finish up this image. Okay, another thing that I want to go over here that I sort of glossed over earlier is the different selection tools. So I have the rectangular selection tool and the circular selection tool, and I mentioned the polygonal selection tool, where you can drag out points into a shape like that, and there's the freehand, where you can just draw out a path like that. And the important options you have here are where it says action down here in the tool options. Right now it is set to replace, so every time I draw out a new selection, it will replace the current selection with the new selection. I can also add to my current selection. So if I click add, if I make a new selection, it will keep my old selection and add to it, and they don't have to intersect. I can create a new selection out to the side, and I can select multiple areas of my image at the same time. And there's also the subtract. With that selected, when I draw out a new selection, it will subtract my new selection from the old selection. If you're trying to make a selection that's not working the way you expect, it is probably because you have one of the wrong modes down here selected. So if I leave it set on subtract and try to select her face, you can see now it has actually selected everything out to the edge of my canvas and left her face unselected because it is on subtract. So this is the selection we made. If your selection is inverted like that, you can hold down Control Shift and hit the letter I on your keyboard, and that will invert your selection. So now, after having done that, her face is selected the way I want. So if your selection ends up inverted, you can hit Control Shift I and it will switch it back around to hopefully what you were trying to get. Another way you can edit a selection is with the selection mask, which here, this selection mask is automatically created whenever I create a selection on my canvas. And this works the same as the transparency mask, where all of the areas painted in white are selected and all of the areas painted in black are deselected. So if I go in here with my airbrush or any other brush and paint with black, you can see this red is the deselected part, so that's subtracting from my selection. So maybe I could tighten this in on her face a bit. And now if I click off of my transparency mask, you can see it's taken that selection in. And I've missed a part here because my brush probably wasn't perfectly opaque. You can feather your selection in that way, give it a soft edge by using a softer brush with less opacity. If I click off of that, you can see I've tightened up my selection there. And if I fill it with blue so that's not confusing, you can see it does have a soft edge to it. And with any of my selection tools selected, I do have the option to, under the tool options, grow my selection by a certain number of pixels, and setting it to the negative value will shrink it by a certain number of pixels if you do want your selection to be slightly larger or smaller than you're making it here. And I do have the option to feather it here by a certain number of pixels and soften the edges, and that will help my selection, or what I've selected, blend a little bit more at the edges and not have a sharp edge around it. If I deselect everything with Control Shift A, again, I can show you some other tools here. The Magic Wand tool will select a continuous area of color within your image. So if I click on the sky here, it selected my entire image, and that's because I'm on a blank layer, and I need to set this reference here from the current layer to this one, which will have it sample all of the layers. And if I hit Control Shift A and deselect and select that sky again, you can see it's done its best to try and select that color of the sky. But you can see it's also grabbing parts of these buildings here, and that is because my threshold here is a bit higher than it should be. And you have some options here for the threshold and the spread, and that will control a little bit how close other colors have to match to the color you're sampling before they become part of your selection. So if I do that again, I've gotten a little bit of a cleaner selection. So if I deselect that, this similar color selection tool, this will do something similar to our magic wand here, which I call the magic wand tool. It's actually the contiguous selection tool, but our similar color selection tool here works in a similar way, except instead of being limited to one section of color, or a contiguous section of color, I guess, it will select all the similar colors within our image. So you can see I've just made the same mistake there. I need to set this to sample all layers and try that again. And you can see doing that, it's tried to select all of the similar colors in our image. And we have the same option for the threshold here that we can change. And these tend to work best either in graphic design type situations where you have large areas of similar flat colors, and also works well at the beginning stages of painting when maybe you're laying out flat colors and want to select everything of a certain color. But in the later stages of painting where there's shading and all sorts of subtleties like that, it doesn't work as well, because you can see our edges are not very precise for our selection. We also have the tool here, the Bezier Curve Selection tool, and this is similar to the Polygonal Selection tool. except when I drag out a point, if I click and don't let go, continue clicking and then drag, it will allow me to drag out these points here and define a curve there. So as I go, I can do that again and sort of create a curved out selection around like that. And I can connect it around like that. And we have the, check the names on here. This is the magnetic curve selection tool. I have names for these different things in my mind that don't always exactly match to what they're called when you hover your cursor over them like that. But this will try and snap your selection along a path in your image, and it tends to work best when there is a clear delineation in color or contrast. So if we just test it along her shoulder here and click along here, you can see it's doing its best to try and snap to this change in brightness and contrast and sort of the way this form is defined. So let's see if I can go along her hair here. And if I hit enter, it will go ahead and make that selection for me. And that works best when there is a clear separation in your subject that you're trying to select, clear separation between the subject and background. So this video has already gotten long, so I might as well go ahead and cover a couple more tools that might be useful. We have, of course, the crop tool, which would allow you to crop out part of your image or crop in on the part that you want, depending on how you want to look at it. You also have the option, if you click the checkbox next to grow down here, you can, when you drag out your crop, it will allow you to drag out beyond the edges of your canvas, and you can expand your canvas that way. So you can do it like that. And this sort of smoky looking part around the edge, that is the vignette that I drew earlier. So it does actually allow you to paint out beyond the boundaries of your canvas, even if your canvas is smaller than where you're painting. And I want to show the Smart Patch tool. This will allow you to correct parts of your image in a way that's similar to the clone tool that we looked at earlier. To use this, it does only work on a single layer as far as I know. So I'll need to go up here to Layer, New Layer from Visible. For some reason with this tool, the Shift and Drag doesn't work to change the size, so I'll have to change the size up here. And say I wanted to delete this highlight. If I draw over that, it's going to do its best to figure out what it is that I'm trying to select there, and then sort of try and blend that in, sampling from the surroundings. So that's worked pretty well. So if there's small corrections you want to make, you can try using this. Okay, so I think that covers at least 95% of what I use in KRITA on a regular basis. If you want to learn more about generative AI for KRITA and more about the plugin in particular, see my other videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.